Polyp. In the deep, dark, softly pliable depths of shiny moist and mucky brown, pink, and white, it was stirring, slowly emerging from the dream years, waking up for the first time and yet always cognizant of something, waiting for its moment to come, its hour upon the stage, biding time, space, sanity, waiting, leeching nourishment from the host, sucking energy out of the stuff that came from above, imagining what freedom would taste like. Freedom tasted of blood, and lots of it. Vincent, a tall, nondescript, worried-looking man in his 40s, waited for his colonoscopy appointment with a weary inevitability mixed with mild anxiety. He hated the whole rigmarole. Yet what was there to hate, really? It was a lifesaver, this procedure. That was how he should look at it, dispassionately and scientifically. Vincent was not exactly the dispassionate scientific type. Not that a colonoscopy was painful, or even that unpleasant. After all, some people would pay big bucks to have a flexible tube with a camera at the end of it thrust deep up into their bowels, but not Vincent. Having a colonoscopy every year was a pain in the... the jokes would come thick and fast if he ever told anyone about it, but it was too humiliating, too embarrassing. His body had let him down, genetically, that is. Because of a pretty frightening family history of colon cancer, he had to have an examination every year. Luckily, he had a top gastroenterologist to do it, so the dire possibility of getting a perforated bowel from the procedure was remote. Still, having a man joke with you while he was threading an enormous tube up your ass was not exactly fun and games, was it? It verged on the pervy. And Vincent was, if anything, not the least bit pervy, not the least bit exceptional, not the least bit an outstanding man of his immediate circle, which may explain to a small extent why he had to endure all the worry and anticipation on his own. First, he had to prepare for a couple of days. Day 1, a low-residue diet consisting of white bread, white meat, no fruits and vegetables, no dairy products, no fiber whatsoever. Basically, the diet that's killing off the Western world. Day 2, after a breakfast of white toast and coffee, he had to fast and drink plenty of liquids until the procedure the next day. During the afternoon of Day 2, he was required to consume what felt like gallons of an osmotic laxative called Clean Prep, sweetly foul-tasting liquid that would turn anything harboring inside his intestines into a veritable Niagara Falls of shit. Diarrhea for a day, so virulent that his butt felt like he'd been passing acid. Vincent used to drink to get through the ordeal, vodka martinis, sans olives, of course, because of the fiber, or white wine. But he eventually realized that the booze just made him feel worse the day of the procedure, not better. So he decided to look upon the regime like a brief spell in detox, something that movie stars and royalty would shell out thousands for. Of course, if he was a movie star or royalty, he'd be in some swanky drying-out clinic in the countryside, with beautiful babes giving him seaweed massages and gently caressing his temples, not sitting on an uncomfortable plastic chair in a dingy, urine-colored waiting room outside the endoscopy department of St. Stephen's Hospital. His stomach was so empty that it almost made him feel sick. His colon grumbled noises of protest from the brutal treatment of the Clean Prep experience. The magazines on the table were at least 6 months old. There was a large, hopeful-looking television in the corner. It was resolutely off, daring some brave soul to turn it on. Vincent knew that late-morning TV horror, property shows, cooking shows, phone-in shows, talk shows would be the last thing in the world to cheer him up on this particular day. Then, after a wait lasting around half an hour, a nurse came in to escort him to a large room dotted with curtained-off hospital beds, all equipped with blood pressure and heart rate monitors. The tall, powerfully built nurse, whose name tag proclaimed her to be Iwami Abayami Sullivan, briskly told Vincent to strip from the waist down. This was the kind of invitation that he would normally obey, but from someone like Iwami, who looked like she was permanently chewing on a wasp, it was more an order that he had to follow or risk severe consequences to his manhood. As she left, Iwami pulled the curtains around his bed for privacy. They never quite met. Gaping holes meant that if they really wanted to, the other nursing staff could spy on him. But then again, why would they want to? The faded, flower-patterned hospital gown lay on the bed. Why flower-patterned? Couldn't they have found a more manly garment for him to wear? Had his pants halfway down to his knees when Iwami bustled in without apology, holding what looked like baby Doc Duvalier's leftover Bermuda shorts, a fetching shade of turquoise made of some kind of disposable papery cloth material. Iwami announced that these were Vincent's dignity shorts, a new PC innovation to prevent people of certain religious affiliations getting too embarrassed by the inevitable discovery that hospital gowns opened at the back. Vincent put on the dignity shorts and felt anything but dignified. Rather than a handy opening in the front for any necessary trips to the toilet, there was a slit up the back which provided easy access for Dr. Stanson and his long black tube of joy. Iwami returned with a couple of forms and fired some questions at Vincent. They're all the usual suspects. Did he have the human variant of Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease? Like he would know. Did he have any dental work that might get knocked out by a careless elbow of the medical staff? What medicine was he on? Did he still have his tonsils, etc., etc., etc.? Why ask the same questions every year? Couldn't they just file his answers away in a computer? Finally, Iwami left him in peace. Vincent lay down on the bed and placed his hand on his lower abdomen. Felt a bit weird down there, but it was hard to judge, considering what he'd put it through in the last couple of days. And if he was an alcoholic, maybe his colon was too, desperate for an invigorating margarita or a nice glass of crisp and fragrant Chablis. Then there was movement down there, as if a ferret was scuttling through the winding passages of his bowels. Vincent nearly levitated off the bed in alarm, but after the initial shock, he put it down to some kind of fart-fueled spasm. Nestling in Vincent's colon, an area the length of 20 meters and it flattened out the surface of a football field, was building up to the crisis point. It didn't want to hurt the host, so its first tenuous attempts at freedom were cautious. It gathered its intelligence from the 100 million neurons embedded in the second brain, or the enteric nervous system that controlled the gastrointestinal system of Vincent's body. Although only containing 1,000th of the neurons residing in the human brain, the second brain was capable of operating independently of both the brain and the spinal cord. Whatever had evolved in Vincent's gut was beyond the wildest dreams of the most unconventional of neurogastroenterologists. Colleen, the head endoscopy nurse, a cheerful soul with an Irish lilt and a charming manner, pushed back the curtain so she could roll Vincent's bed into endoscopy room 4. He lay back and stared up at the ceiling as it whisked past. Dr. Stanson, movie star handsome and prosperous looking, was already in the examination room. A couple of other nurses bustled around getting the equipment ready. The nurses connected Vincent to the blood pressure, heart rate, and blood oxygen level monitors, then inserted a nasal cannula, a thin tube with 2 small nozzles that protruded into Vincent's nostrils and delivered supplemental oxygen. Colleen asked Vincent to roll over on his left side, with his right arm lying down his body, the palm of his hand facing upwards so she could administer his procedural medication intravenously into a handy vein in his wrist. A relaxed cocktail of buscopan, an antispasmodic, 20 milligrams, midazolam, a sedative, 2 milligrams, and pethidine, aka Demerol, a painkiller, 25 milligrams. As Colleen injected the sedatives, Vincent felt their effects swirl through his bloodstream, instantly melting away his anxiety. He didn't give a damn anymore, and it was wonderful. Wished he could have this stuff on a permanent drip feed 24/7. The one time he'd opted out of sedation, because he'd had an important presentation in the afternoon and needed his wits about him, was a pretty appalling experience. It wasn't necessarily the discomfort that remained burnt in his memory, but the abject humiliation. Vincent was facing a color monitor that was connected by a lead to the endoscope camera, so he could watch the whole thing on the screen if he wanted to. Felt like he was in a cheap version of Fantastic Voyage, canonically journeying through his own body, loosey-goosey with the drugs, daydreaming about Raquel Welch and that tight-fitting white bodysuit of hers, floating around in a tiny ship in a circulatory system. Vincent was grateful he didn't have to see the freak show behind him as his doctor skillfully threaded the Pentax Zoom colon 18 endoscope through his anus, up his rectum, then his colon. Sigmoid, then descending, then the transverse and ascending colon, ultimately ending up at the last junction in town, the terminal ileum. The only pain involved was when the doctor gusted some air through the tube to distend his colon. From a camera's eye view, his colon looked as corrugated as an accordion, or his ex-wife's clothes-dryer extractor tube. Hard to spot incipient fleshy growths, or polyps as they were known, among the ruffled terrain of the colon that way. So the endoscope was equipped with air tubes, along with a camera and a lighting device. It was also able to squirt blue dye up there, most disconcerting sight, but helped the doctor spot any polyps, which if left to themselves might go over to the dark side, become cancerous in the future. Vincent closed his eyes and tried to drift away with the drugs, but was alerted by Dr. Stanson saying something about a polyp. He opened his eyes and was a bit shocked to see a prominent growth attached to the side of his colon displayed on the monitor. How do the damn things grow so fast? Vincent wondered. He watched as Dr. Stanson attempted to perform a polypectomy by lassoing the polyp with a cold snare electric wire device that was also contained within the endoscope. Dr. Stanson looped the wire over the polyp and tightened it. He gave a little tug, which normally would slice the polyp away from the wall of the colon, at the same time cauterizing the wound. But the polyp stubbornly held on for dear life. Then something happened. The polyp was loose. When Dr. Stanson tried to suck the fleshy growth into an endoscope for retrieval and later biopsy, it refused to go in. It seemed to expand right there on its own. Vincent was watching the show on the monitor with a drugged fascination. He heard the puzzled responses from the staff behind him as they tried to figure out what to do. And a pain shot through Vincent's bowels like a shard of broken glass. He cried out and tried to move. One of the nurses placed her arms over him to hold him down. "Easy, Vincent, easy," Dr. Stanson soothed. "It's just the air I've pumped in. Let it out if you need to." "It's not the air!" Vincent shrieked, writhing on the table. Colleen hurriedly prepared more Demerol and shot it into Vincent's vein. Then he heard one of the nurses scream. The pain in his gut became unbearable, and he joined her. Colleen shouted, "Doctor, look at that!" Dr. Stanson gave a startled yell, and that was when it got really weird. Vincent felt something deep inside him rise up, the only way he could describe the sensation, and move down, pushing the endoscope in front of it. Dr. Stanson, meanwhile, was trying to understand why the endoscope was coming out of his patient's anus at high speed, nearly burning his rubber-gloved, encased hands without any help from the esteemed doctor himself. Finally, the endoscope came shooting out of Vincent's rectum like a missile, whacking one of the nurses so hard that the forehead that she dropped to the floor as if she'd been poleaxed. Then something else traveled down and blasted out of Vincent's ass, ricocheting around the room like a bullet, entering the bodies of the unfortunate hospital staff at abdominal level, causing everyone in the room, except Vincent, to come to a nasty and unexpectedly sudden demise. The ripping pain and chaos of the scene was all too much for him, and he blacked out. When Vincent finally came to and opened his eyes, the machines around him were still beeping contentedly. He had no idea how long he'd been unconscious. For a moment, he thought he must have had some midazolam-induced hallucination. When he looked over his shoulder, he was horrified to see that the examination room was littered with blood and body parts. He sat up in bed and took in the eviscerated bodies of his doctor, the endoscopy nurse, and the other nurses on the floor. Vincent turned and dry-heaved over the other side of the bed. He was still in pain, but it didn't feel life-threatening. Whatever had done this didn't seem interested in him for what had issued forth from his bowels to cause such mayhem. Vincent carefully got off the hospital bed on the monitor side, not wanting to tread in the blood and guts slooshed all over the floor. He went over to the door of the examination room and froze. Suddenly, he didn't want to open it, worried about what else he would find. Reluctantly, he pushed the door open and peeked out. It was bad. Blood everywhere. Bodies everywhere. Iwami was lying on the floor near the nurse's station, and he spotted her chest rising and falling fitfully. He walked over as quickly as he could and knelt next to her. Her uniform was soaked with blood, and bits of mangled colon were poking out from her lower abdomen. Vincent placed his hand on her forehead. It was feverishly hot. Her eyes popped open, and she looked at him and screamed, "What did you do?" He snatched his hand away and screamed back, "I didn't do anything!" Iwami convulsed, choked, threw up blood, and died right there in front of him. Vincent stood up slowly. Everyone in the recovery room was dead. He walked over to the small cupboard where he placed his clothes and quickly dressed. He didn't know what was going on. One thing was for certain. Hanging around in the endoscopy department of St. Stephen's Hospital was in his dignity shorts was not going to be good for his health. Vincent moved through the eerily empty corridors of the normally bustling hospital. Blood was everywhere. Bodies were everywhere, with entrails streaming out of their abdominal cavities. No one was left alive. His midazolam-fogged brain was trying to make sense of it all. Something very fucked up had just occurred. Was some rampaging polyp going nuts in the hospital? How the hell could something like this happen, especially to someone as unremarkable as him? Vincent made his way down the entrance hall. It was silent, with just the ringing of unanswered phones echoing through the building. He stopped just as he was about to go through the revolving doors to the street and turned around. The white walls of the hall were drenched in arterial spray. as if Jackson Pollock had been possessed by an alien and then gone mad. Why was he still alive? Whatever had carried out this massacre could so easily have obliterated him too. Then he heard it. A sound. A sound like nothing he'd ever heard before, except maybe in some cheesy sci-fi film when he was a kid and his big brother had made him watch the black and white versions of The Thing from Outer Space, or The Day the Earth Stood Still. Vincent could have turned back to the revolving doors and gotten the hell out of Dodge, but he chose not to. He could have called the police, but would they have believed him? I think a polyp just came out of my butt and slaughtered a bunch of people. He didn't think so. The thing had come from him, so it was his problem to sort out. Maybe he had some kind of immunity. It could have killed him, but had chosen not to. Hold on a minute. A polyp making a choice? His screaming brain wanted to reject the thought as soon as it emerged, but something had butchered all these people, and he knew in his gut, no pun intended, it had come from inside him. Vincent followed the sound as best he could. It was a bit difficult to pinpoint its source, but as he walked down the corridor it grew louder. Sucking, slurping, slushing sound, accompanied by an almost theremin-like whistling. Vincent was walking past the disabled toilet when he realized the noise was coming from inside. He'd never faced anything particularly dangerous in his life before. He'd always made a point of avoiding any conflict or confrontation, so he was literally quaking with fear. There was no question in his mind that he had to go in there and face it, whatever it was. However, Vincent was fervently hoping that his immunity theory wouldn't prove to be unjustified. With his heart thumping like a Keith Moon drum solo, Vincent cautiously opened the door of the disabled toilet. The squelching sounds quieted down but did not cease. He was relieved to see that the lights were still on. He slipped inside and spotted the polyp in the corner. It had grown terrifyingly fast. It was at least 7 feet tall, slouching on the toilet like a disaffected teenager, human intestines piled up next to it. No features to speak of, just a huge leech-like mouth containing a tripartite jaw filled with hundreds of tiny, sharp teeth that were busy masticating its unfortunate victims' colons. Vincent noticed some black spots just above the mouth that might be eyes. At the same time, the polyp noticed Vincent and swallowed the remains of its dinner, and smiled at him. Vincent felt like throwing up, but all he could do was gag. The smell of the thing was revolting, a vile combination of excrement and blood. Wondered how long he could stay on his feet without fainting. Then it spoke. "Hi, Dad. How's it hanging?" The polyp wheezed. Vincent's balls shrank to the size of peanuts, and a chill iced his extremities. I'm not your father. You're a monster. Well, why have you murdered all these people?" Vincent stuttered. "Hey, boys gotta eat," the polyp burped cheerfully. "How did this happen? What the hell are you?" The polyp reared back in what looked like a very human kind of annoyance. "Man, you want me to explain to you what's going on? Geez, you must be insane in the membrane." "I am. That's what you got to get your head around. Forget about explanations. I exist, and that's all you have to worry about right now." "Oh, shit. Hey, you're talking about the stuff I love." The polyp burbled. "Shit and blood and all those millions of neurons I'm ingesting right now. Making me smarter, making me high on serotonin. Did you know that more than 90% of the body's serotonin lies in the gut? I am eating. I am growing. I am smarter than you. I am happier than you. I'm the second brain of your nightmares, Daddy dearest." Vincent didn't know what to do. It was rather alarming to be talking to an enormous fleshy bump, especially when it kept calling him Dad. He wanted to kill it. He was being distracted by its personality. After all, no one or no thing ever called him Dad before, and this polyp was a part of him. What would happen if the polyp died? Would Vincent die too? What if it wanted to get back inside him, its former host? That was too awful to contemplate. Vincent pushed these thoughts from his mind. He didn't care what happened to him anymore. This monster, created in his gut somehow, had massacred dozens of people, so his course was clear. He had to destroy it. Vincent turned and ran out of the toilet, then down the corridor to the entrance hall. Being forced to watch all those old sci-fi movies back in his childhood, he knew that the most effective weapon against unknown creatures was fire. Of course, now that new regulations prevented any smoking in the public building, finding the required ingredients to burn the polyp to a crisp was challenging. By the time he'd found a fire axe, wrapped strips of cotton wound dressing around it, drenched it with rubbing alcohol, precious minutes had flown past. Finding a match or a lighter was the most difficult task, requiring him to rummage through the handbags and pockets of the corpses littering the entrance hall. Then he remembered the hospital staff were the worst offenders as far as smoking was concerned. So he concentrated his search on the bodies behind the information desk and was rewarded with a vintage gold Dunhill lighter. Vincent dashed back down the corridor to the disabled toilet, armed with his makeshift torch. The slurping and munching noises had resumed, so the Polyp was still in residence. Vincent squeezed through the doorway, just managing to hide the axe behind his back. The Polyp stopped chewing and swallowed. "You walked out in the middle of our conversation, Dad. That's really rude." "Stop calling me Dad, you thing." Vincent felt the insult was pretty limp, but he was simply lost for words when confronting the creature. "Hey, Polyp is the name, Daddy-O. I came from you, so get over it." The Polyp leaned over and grabbed some more intestines with its mouth, snorkeling up the disembodied colons like spaghetti bolognese. While its attention was momentarily distracted, Vincent took the opportunity to light the rags on his homemade torch. The Polyp, instantly alerted, spat out its food and growled. Vincent doused the creature with alcohol, threw the torch, and then ran like hell. He stopped 20 feet down the corridor and turned around. The sound emerging from the toilet was horrendous. A crackling, hissing, squealing, throbbing racket accompanied by wisps of greasy, miasmic smoke curling from underneath the door. Then, totally unexpected, an explosion, blowing the door out so violently that it hit the wall opposite. Fire alarms began to wail and the sprinkler system kicked into action. Vincent cautiously walked back to the toilet, wondering what he was going to find. Covering his mouth and nose with his shirt tail so he wouldn't have to breathe in the truly repellent smell of fried polyp, he peered around the doorway. The polyp was still on the toilet, but the top half of it was gone, the other half sinking slowly into the bowl, scorched and blackened, heat blisters growing on the surface of the creature. Steam caused by the water from the sprinklers gently rose up like a mist from a harbor town. But it was what was inside that made Vincent fall to his knees, overwhelmed by the horror of it all. He'd made a mistake. A big mistake. He could see that now. How could he have anticipated that the diabolical thing would explode? From inside of the polyp, hundreds of new fleshy growths were squirming and moving, tiny at first. As they devoured their creator, they grew fast. Some of the more energetic ones were already busily crawling down their progenitor onto the floor, slithering determinedly towards Vincent like inchworms hyped up on crack cocaine. Vincent turned and crawled on his hands and knees out of the toilet, weak with fear and horror. He managed to scramble to his feet in the corridor, staggered to the entrance hall, just in time to see two firemen dash through the door and make for the source of the foul smoke. Vincent tried to stop them, tried to speak, tried to warn them. He was too shocked by what had happened to make any sense and just waved his arms around ineffectually. As one fireman helped him out of the building towards a waiting ambulance, he heard a distant echoing scream coming from the direction of the disabled toilet. As he lay on the gurney inside the ambulance, Vincent looked through the small window as first firemen, then policemen, and the army streamed into the hospital. The attendant gave him something to calm his nerves. No one bothered to ask him what had happened. They were too busy fighting the polyp horde inside. He wondered if the humans would win. Then he felt something inside him, that scuttling feeling inside his bowels again, and Vincent knew it wasn't over.